Last fortnight, Games Workshop sent me a mountain of plastic crack, 170 sprues of Rohan scenery, and we dived into plastic bashing a whole heap of buildings to build up our arsenal of Rohan structures. And last week, we began work on the inner court using Weta Workshop's new Edoras collectible to give us an insanely screen-accurate platform for the centerpiece of this monster Edoras layout. Today we're going to begin to combine this monster pile of plastic crack with this gorgeously screen-accurate hilltop as we continue to build the biggest wargaming board in YouTube history. So far we've made a whole bunch of pieces with the GW plastic mountain, and these structures here are the beginnings of a whole horde of buildings that will flesh out the lower slopes of the fortified mountain city of Edoras. This board essentially has two key regions, the upper hilltop or the inner court, which starts up here at the Golden Hall and continues down here to the base of the inner court, soon to be defended by a Palisade wall. And then from here that slopes down to a lower city just jam-packed with Rohan buildings, which I think will span about 50 square feet wrapping around the base of the rocky hilltop. And then that entire lower city is encircled by the outer Palisade wall. And then, eventually, the entire Edoras board will connect to Helm's Deep with a Warg Attack and Westfold bridging layout. This layout is going to be absolutely huge. So, let's start smashing up some plastic. Now, our 170 sprues from GW are made of two types of frame, our Rohan house and the Rohan Palisade. Now, in our last Sprue Mountain video, we made a good start getting a lot of work done with the Rohan houses and had a small experiment with the Palisades, so today we're going to flip that on its head and start by building some massive fortifications for the inner court. I started by grabbing just a bunch of Palisade kits and clipping them all down and cleaning them up into my sorting tubs so that we are kitted out with an arsenal of Palisade Walls to defend the Golden Hall of Meduseld. Now, we have some amazing reference for this section of the board. The new Edoras collectible by Weta Workshop just gives us such a great idea of how this palisade fortifies the upper city. It isn't a full-on ring wall, it simply spans the only accessible path up to the inner court, which is sitting high up on this rocky escarpment. Now, the beauty of this upper region of the board is that this is the exact area of Edoras that was built out on location on Mount Sunday. So this Weta collectible, and thus my upper region of the diorama, is insanely screen accurate, but hold onto your hats because I'm about to say something crazy. Now, the reason I actually haven't built this palisade yet is because I'm thinking I'm gonna do something crazy and veer away from screen accuracy to the Lord of the Rings. Don't panic, just bear with me. When we think about this upper area of Edoras, the inner court, it doesn't really make sense that the inner palisade is so minimal, and the reason that it was built this way is because of the physical limitations of the location itself. This region of the set is right up against the cliff. There was very limited buildable space up there on the top of Mount Sunday, and it had to be prioritized for key regions getting heaps of screen time, and they could always use the gatehouse build down on the lower slopes for any sexy gatehouse entering shots. Now, it would seem that I'm not alone in thinking this, because if we look at the War of the Rohirrim trailer, we can clearly see a much more fortified gatehouse structure in the inner court. Not to mention, it's going to be way better for gameplay to have something much more kind of interactable and defendable in sieges, not as intense as this kind of big lower city gatehouse, but somewhere in the middle. So I think our best plan of attack is to capture the flavor of the original set, but just bulk it out a little with influences from the lower main gatehouse like the team on the War of the Rohirrim did. But if we look at the Weta Workshop collectible for reference, we can immediately see a problem with the board as it stands. The lower section of our layout hasn't really been landformed properly, and it doesn't match the lovely sloping surface that creates that staggered palisade look, and I need to get more depth into our foam, which means that the whole board needs to be raised up. First job is getting a bit more space in the workshop. Now, those of you with elven eyes may have noticed this board is actually built in two halves. This was essential for storage and transportation, but with such a crazy shaped hillside, it was a real challenge, and as we thicken the foam layers here, we need to make sure that we keep these two halves working. Rissa and I tucked the back half away on the storage racking behind the curtains with some difficulty, messy, but it's all fine. We got it in there in the end. And now we need to knock up the final foundation for the front half of the board. First, I grabbed a few new sheets of 30mm XPS and cut them to size to kind of extend the footprint of the hilltop out a little, and then knocked up an exterior timber frame matching that new foam layer perfectly. I then flipped the foundation upside down and began to reinforce it with additional timber cross beams. More liquid nails and screws held our weird shaped gaming board all together, and with the cross beams secured at the right angles to support those panels above, I flipped it back over and then mounted our main board straight down onto the new foundation. Before we get to carving, I want to make a start on the palisade defenses so we can carve that hill perfectly to support what our palisade needs. So let the GW plastic bashing begin. First, we need our new gatehouse, and I started with the Games Workshop watchtower, but it's quite small, that upper tower region. It's only made from 4 wooden plank tiles, so I kit bashed 9 together to get a larger square of plankage, and then used acrylic filler to fill in all the gaps, and then glued the new beast platform to the 4 tower pillars. Next, we need the gate. Now, the Palisade wall kit actually comes with this awesome working gate, so I assembled the Palisade gate doors as per normal, but then to mount them to our tower, I cut down 2 of the Palisade walls where the gate normally mounts and glued those to the tower support beams. I completed the back battlement just like the front one, and I really love how that is working, looks awesome, and then grabbed some roofing pieces from the Rohan house kit and knocked up a little roof to try and capture that sloping thatch look that we see in the Edoras main gatehouse, but it just was not working. It was kind of goofy, so I abandoned that idea and instead decided to work on a gatehouse bastion. I grabbed a bunch of these straight palisade walls and started cutting them into pieces, essentially making a square palisade fort overlapping various pieces of log walkway and palisade struts to interconnect the inner battlement, and then kit bashed a custom piece of palisade wall, joining several normal height pieces to a shortened palisade to create essentially a doorway to access the inside of the fort, and then glued all of those pieces together. We absolutely need a stone plinth, just like our gatehouse reference, hand carving a stone texture stone by stone with a pencil until the entire surface was cobbled together, and then textured the cobblestone with good old foily and bricky. Nice to see those boys back in action. The final stage was to then join our gatehouse tower to the fort, which required cutting into the stone foundation to seat the tower beam hard up against that fort, and then add additional battlements and join the various tower levels with some ladders. So, since designing this little guy, I finally got out to the cinema to see War of the Rohirrim, and now I know why the gatehouse is different. Spoiler alert, this one gets smashed apart by a mummakill. So, I have decided that I am going to make this completely destructible, which means we need some magnets. Now, I've actually decided that this is all I'm going to build. It's sort of a hybrid structure between the anime and the Peter Jackson versions, not the full gatehouse, but a little more substantial than the simple gate that was built on location and that we can see in the Weta Workshop collectible. I lined up the perfect spot on the hillside for our fort and gatehouse, and then grabbed some magnets from the magnetbaron.com and mounted them down into the board and seated the matching magnet in the base of the fort's foam foundation. Once the liquid nails were fully cured, we can see just how nicely that swaps in and out. Now, of course, we're also going to need an exploded version, so I whipped that up with some damaged cobblestone foundation and a few pieces of the timber structure left to tie into the remaining walls, and with some new magnets in that piece, we can just swap them in and out when the gate gets destroyed. I've been magnetizing different parts of a whole range of projects for years, from all the various weapon and equipment loadouts in our Dawn of War Warhammer series, all my Horus Heresy vehicles from tanks to titans, even destructible ruins on my Osgiliath megaboard. So I got some help from the almighty magnetbaron.com because magnets, they just solve everything. Magnetbaron.com have just an outrageous range of magnets that are super powerful and perfect for all your wargaming and hobby needs. Every possible size and shape of magnet you could ever want, and some really brilliant magnet sets for notoriously difficult to magnetize models, like these Imperial Knight magnet kits to quickly and easily magnetize all of your knight's important weapon options without any drilling filling or putty work, as well as heaps of mega handy tools like the brilliant Magnicators 2.0, which have just gone on pre-order, so you'll never glue a magnet in with the wrong polarity ever again. Con from the Magnet Baron is my longest running sponsor. He always comes through for me, so if you guys want to support Zorpazorp and get some amazing magnets for all your hobby needs, check out magnetbaron.com, link down in the description. So with the gatehouse coming along, we need to start working towards this eastern cliff face, and I realized that I needed to add a little piece of this next section of palisade onto the gatehouse, which of course I had to make in duplicate, one for our intact fort and one for the destroyed version. This piece is built into the stone foundation and juts out from the open battlement, completed with a ladder to make for some great gameplay, and now makes the whole structure much easier to keep it modular and destructible. Before we can finish off the palisade leading into the cliff, we need to begin the cliff itself, so we have a rocky foundation to build our palisade into. So I grabbed a whole bunch of rock molds, just like the cliffs that we've already done all across our Rohan boards, and made a bunch of casts so I'd have enough for the new cliff faces here, and to begin building up my stockpile for tackling the last of Helm's Deep next week. I laid out a bunch of casts on the rock face, holding them in place with wooden skewers to keep them secure while tweaking, and then while the liquid nails dries as they are glued in place. Next, I knocked up the last portion of the eastern battlement, a little L-shaped palisade that will mount hard up against our new cliff face, complete with this awesome little ramp to allow another access point up to the battlements. I primed this in grey and gave it an overbrush in light grey before gluing it into the plaster to make painting easier down the track, and then with that glued in place we can now finish our cliffs in earnest. I whipped out all of our skewers and grabbed some modelling compound, which is a plaster cellulose fibre mix, and blended all of the individual plaster casts into one cohesive rock face. I also worked this mixture up into the palisades to blend them into the landscape and establish the beginning of our landforming. With that blended, this is just looking so good. And I love the Rohan houses, but I think that like these Palisade kits might be my new favorite plastic kit to kit bash. On the western side of the gatehouse, I wanted another piece of palisade that was built into our core structure, just a little section of double-sided wall that I built into the tower battlement and then mounted 2 ladders. And then with that dropped into our magnetic base, we can then start to plan the western wall that will be built into our landform. And here I'm going to do something much more screen accurate to the Peter Jackson palisade layout, which is essentially a fence and not really a battlement. So I really just want to use wall pieces here that zigzag down the slope. But of course, these have all the holes and mounting points from the walkways, so I have to get creative, cutting down walkway pieces and then mounting single wooden beams onto all of our flat palisades. Before mounting our wall, we again need to start the landforming, which began with a huge amount of foam carving to start shaping our hillside. Remember, this is why we added that extra foam layer in the first place. Now I've gotten a nice kind of slope that captures the vibe of the location, but still stays pretty friendly to the gameplay. I then began to work on the cliff, pinning and gluing all our casts in place to build up that lower rock face, again working to the cliff that we've already got to create a really nice looking cliffside. Then after the wall pieces had been primed, dry brushed and dried, I mounted them into the foam, seating them right into that foam layer for strength, and cut some pieces on angles to match the look from the film set of them winding their way down the mountain slope. By making the wall sections at the edge of the cliff a little shorter, I was able to closely match the sloping nature of the fence that was built on location without having to make the landforming so sloped that it would suck for gameplay. Very happy with that little decision. Then a huge pass in modeling compound to blend all of our cliffs and our new palisade, and my goodness, I can just see this location coming together. The realistic landforming is just completing the board. It's really coming alive. Then I grabbed a bunch of the Rohan house kit fences and knocked up the corral that the Rohirrim use for training their horses, matching the shape as closely as possible while using the GW kits. And then I knocked up one final kit bash for the palisades, a destroyed section of that new right side of the gatehouse, which is going to make the destructible gatehouse look very cool indeed. I might make a few like rubble piles to drop in the center. I think that'll look cool to kind of blow everything up, but for now, we're on to painting. I hand primed the foam stone to protect it from our spray paint, and then gave all of the gatehouse pieces a big hit with dark grey rattle can and then a light grey zenithal, really spritzing the application to start building up a mottled paint texture for our wood tones, and then I gave all of those pieces a huge dry brush to accent the raised details in a lighter grey. Then while that dried, I gave our landform a quick undercoat in mottled browns with an overbrush in lighter tones for a kind of subtle accent on the highlights. This is of course going to get probably fully covered in grouts and gravels and grasses and all manner of scenics, but it just acts as a nice kind of safety foundation. Then I grabbed some Liquitex inks and mixed up a couple of wood tones and started spraying our Palisade with a high pigment but transparent filter. This tones the structure, but it lets the dry brushed grey profile we established make all of the details shine. I ended up doing like a 2-stage filter, a darker filter with a little black mixed in around the base of the structure, and anywhere I wanted the wood to kind of be less sun bleached, and then a browny mid-tone everywhere else. Then the final wooden detail was just a dry brush in bone to give us that beautiful weathered timber look, perfect for wood that's been out in the elements for probably hundreds of years.
It's been a mental year for Zorpazorp, really up and down, and the only reason I'm still here is because of my amazing Patreons. And this honor wall is dedicated to their magnificence. All of the Patreons' names go up on the honor wall. The Mega Zorptrons, the top tier, get their own statue and a plaque dedicated to their honor. And my second top tier, the Super Duper Zorptrons, as of today, are also getting their own little plaque up here. I've just added the first 10 on today, so a huge shout out to Maddie, Riley, Julia, George, Dr. Bigler, Greg, Yao, Random Dude, Jack, and JF23. You guys are absolute legends, and all the other Super Duper Zorptrons will get a gorgeous plaque along the top here. It's just started pouring with rain, that's really loud. If you'd like to support Zorpazorp and get yourself on the honor wall, go and check our Patreon link down below. It is just, it just holds this whole channel together. It is unbelievable. The Patreons are just my favorite people in the whole world. There's heaps of other benefits, the Discord, there's weekly vlogs on the Patreon page, loads of stuff to dive into, so go and check it all out down in the description. And a huge, huge thank you.
Then our last paint stage is of course the cliffs. Classic leopard spotting here. First some brown washes flicked and dabbed and splotched for earthy undertones, and then a big pass in black, quite diluted and applied sporadically so that we get tones of varying saturations of grey mixing with our browns. I did the western side first and then the eastern side, and used some wash to kind of tone back any white compound that was still showing on the board, and to wash down the base of the Palisades for sort of like an extra grime layer. Rissa and I then plonked the back half of the board back in, leveled up on some spare foam sheets to get it to the same height, and then I just look at the top section of our Edoras board. It is so close to being finally done, but with all these new defensive structures, I just had to throw some models down, and I really wanted to test out our destructible gate, but my mate Jimmy's Uruks didn't bring any bombs with them, so they had to call in some heavy support.
Heavy support available. Fire!
Good luck to those poor riders of Rohan. That's going to be one rough cavalry charge, but I think the board is going to work very well for some battle reports.
So the upper city is looking awesome. Obviously, we need to do all the scenics and the massive Golden Hall. And then, of course, this Palisade needs to flow down into a lower city stacked full of Games Workshop plastic buildings. But that's all actually going to go on ice for a couple of weeks, because it is time to finally finish Helm's Deep. So that brings an end to 2024, and just a massive thank you to everyone who's tuned in to Zorpazorp over the last year. An extra special shout out to the Patrons who literally stopped the channel from dying, and I am so excited to bring you so much more in 2025. We're kicking it off with the final installment of Helm's Deep next fortnight. That megaboard is looking mental, and I just planned the next 6 months worth of content, and there is some banger stuff coming. So strap in, get ready for more mega hobby here on Zorpazorp, and I'll see you in 2025.